Hello Malak, so what is the topic you are discussing?
So today I'm going to be discussing about toxic masculinity and how it could make people feel and how could they express and go out of the comfort zone sometime to show that it's normal and how it could affect other people.
That's great. And why do you think this topic is important?
I think it's important because obviously every single person has something that they hide or they don't show, and everyone's going through something. No one's actually perfect. And I think it's good to bring up because stereotypes exist, and when stereotypes exist, you can't really be yourself, and people need to see that you can and that it's normal. And yeah. That's
such a great answer. And how does the topic make you feel?
In my opinion, I've always been an inclusive person because I've done, I would say, the things that males do, I've included myself in it, and obviously I got code names for it and stuff. So this topic obviously sometimes is sensitive, and when people say things that aren't okay, just kind of annoys me a bit because anyone can do what they want and they don't have to be an exact category. So I just wanted to show that it's fine.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope you enjoy my documentary and just enjoy.
What do you think toxic masculinity is?
I think toxic masculinity is when males in general find that their egos are hurt. So simple things where it's just I'm stronger than you, or you can't do this, I can. I feel like toxic masculinity often occurs with very people like Andrew Tate, basically. I feel like he's a big example of what toxic masculinity is. So,
yeah. How can toxic masculinity affect people, like males in general?
Males?
Like anyone?
I think that can affect society very largely because we're in a society where it's the 21st century, we're supposed to be growing out of that and where everyone can be inclusive. So I feel like toxic masculinity is a huge setback. We're supposed to work together, not against each other.
Okay, and how could they take off the type of mask they wear?
How could they take off the type of mask that they wear? I think that they could just be more open to things and not be scared of anything. And if it is, it's okay to say your opinion, but not in such a way where it's just comes off rude. Just just don't be toxic, period. Sorry.
So I think toxic masculinity is a term used to describe people that could use masculinity in a toxic way. So using both the words in that, and that could be any person, any gender, any age, any sexuality, any religion, any faith, etc., etc. And it could be using phrases such as man up and describing men as being strong and showing emotions as weak. So anything that a man might, not all men, some men might consider weak and not showing that, so not showing emotions, not maybe pretending or feeling like you have to act a certain way, or that you have to like certain things, so like football and beer, that could be, rather than in a nice little mocktail or a cocktail with a little cherry in it, or in certain TV shows. There are TV shows out there that I know a lot of men would watch, but they'll pretend that they don't watch it, or vice versa. There's shows that might only be seen for men, but women watch it, and it's using that in a toxic way and not being able to be truly who you are. So I think again that's with all genders and non-gendered people as well.
And how can it affect people?
I think sometimes people can hide away from their feelings. So they can put a wall up, or people say put a mask on or have a smile on, but they're not truly happy. So it could be struggling with their mental health. So I know there's a lot of high numbers of males, for example, that struggle with mental health and might not talk about it because it's perceived as weak to talk about it. It's not something that a lot of men feel comfortable talking about with other men. So it might be that they feel comfort in someone that they talk to, but not everyone has that. And again, I think people see crying as weak, and it's just showing emotions as weak. And there's certain people in my life, for example, that have been affected by it, like they haven't spoken about how they feel, and that causes them to feel even more low than they already are, and then that can make them struggle in their day-to-day life. I think you can also affect those around you. So if you haven't spoken about, for example, your feelings and your mental health, and then you're struggling, and it can end up either in hospital or worse, and then it's like your family and friends can be affected by that. And then also, like what I mentioned, like comments like "man up," it's like seems like in a female's eyes, oh, so a man is like the strong one, but I'm strong and I can be strong, I can be who I am. Just because I talk about my emotions, I cry, doesn't mean I'm not strong, doesn't mean I'm weak. So it can affect how females feel as well.
Yeah. And how could they take off the type of mask that they wear?
I think it's just being open, and it's all about communication and being, like I mentioned, open with everyone and being open with yourself first. I think it's really important to be open and honest with yourself about how you're feeling, and then once you're open and honest with yourself, you can have those open and honest conversations with everyone else. And it might not just be helpful for you, but it might be helpful for others. And if you're raising awareness of men can talk about their feelings, men can open up, men can have conversations around mental health, even though it might be stigmatised, it might be seen as weak. Have those conversations, because I think talking is the most important thing, and I think talking starts a conversation and can offer extra advice and support. So whether you need to access counselling, whether you decide, oh, maybe me going on a diet and exercising is going to make me feel happier. So I think starting the conversation is important, and doing research about what's going on, what toxic masculinity is, and how you can avoid being lumped in with that phrase and stuff.
What do you think toxic masculinity is?
Men, I guess it's kind of sexism, misogyny as well, and the belief that men have to behave a certain way, which kind of forces them to behave in ways that are not appropriate in society.
How can toxic masculinity affect people?
I guess for men, it can be negative for them, because I guess they have to uphold this thing about being strong all the time, and like if they're ever sad or depressed, like they can't express that. And then for women, normally that will be expressed through like stuff like misogyny or sexism.
Yeah. And how could they take off the type of mask they wear?
I guess we would have to progress as a society and debunk these myths about how men should be.
What do you think toxic masculinity is?
I think for me, toxic masculinity is the extreme end of what it means to be a man, I would say.
And how do you think it can affect people?
I think it can affect people in a number of ways. I think firstly the man. It sets an expectation that's not realistic, and I think for someone of the opposite sex, it can set a precedent for an expectation for them as well. For example, a lot of women that I know might set an unrealistic expectation for them too.
How do you think they could take off the type of mask that they wear?
So there's this old saying in the Japanese culture that people wear 3 masks. So the first mask is what your close friends and family see. The second is what your colleagues and people that you work with see, but they're not close to you. And the third is the mask of the other person that you really are. So I think for me is actually taking off that mask that you want people to see and putting on the third mask in the Japanese saying, putting on the third mask of what you actually want people to see, who you are as a person.
What do you think toxic masculinity is?
Toxic masculinity, I believe, is reinforcing stereotypes of both men and women. For example, we can have people reinforcing stereotypes of women. Let's say, for example, we're sensitive on our period, you don't talk to a woman on her red, that is very detrimental. And toxic masculinity is also, how do I say it, not allowing men to like we put a label on what masculinity is, and that's toxic. For example, a man has to be macho, a man can't cry, a man can't be sensitive. And I feel like that is so toxic, so detrimental. Again, like men are most likely to commit suicide than their female counterparts, and I genuinely feel like it is toxic masculinity. The idea that we have this whole, we have this whole label what a man should be. Whereas with girls, I will be honest, in previous years, especially in the 90s, there was a lot more change towards how women are perceived in the workplace, that we can get jobs. We no longer have to be confined in like being housewives or having kids. And there is much more progression to a woman being what a woman is today. But again, I can only speak for Western society. Being a woman will have different labels and different meanings in different types of societies around the world. But I feel like for men, I feel like in Western society, there is some progress, but I feel like I would love to see more progress of men maybe not even being feminine, because I feel like labeling a guy feminine is so as detrimental, because then you're saying, wait, so crying and being sensitive are all female feminine traits, like kind of guy not crying. And even then, it's not about a guy being sensitive and crying, it's about doing the job he wants. It's about perhaps even raising a family, or maybe a guy doesn't even want to have a job, maybe he wants to have kids, he wants to you know, become a house husband, you know what I mean? So it definitely does it has different labels, but as a woman, as a brown woman living in the UK, I can only speak for Western society so far, but I'm also a Bangladeshi woman as an ethnic minority, so I can also say what Bangladeshis may think what a man is, which is a man has to work, he has to provide for the family, but even providing for the family doesn't have to be financial. It can be love and care and chores around the house. So that's a bit of a long-winded answer, but I generally feel like toxic masculinity is imposing labels on both men and women and trying to enforce it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And how do you think that can affect people?
Definitely stereotyping people. Again, men are most likely to commit suicide than women, and that is, you know, committing suicide is just a really upsetting statistic to see. But men, they are so much more likely to do so because they struggle to find, you know, therapy, well-being services because of the labels that are imposed on them. Because men can face so many other issues that women may also face too. Yes, domestic abuse rates for women are higher, but that doesn't mean we ignore that percentage of men that do face domestic abuse, that do face rape, that do face sexual assault. And yes, again, there is a lot we need to change in regards to if a woman can walk outside safely at night, but how about men as well when it comes to that small minority? And even though we're not even looking at the breakdown of those statistics, for example, a white man will have a different privilege compared to maybe an ethnic minority guy. And again, these labels, it's very hard to put one whole gigantic label on one whole gigantic population, which is the male population, because you also need to break down the demographics and how each label affects each different type of man in a certain specific way.
And last question, how do you think that they can take off the type of mask that they wear?
That's a very metaphorical question. I'm just trying to decipher it in my head. It depends on what you mean by mask.
Like the face that they put on when they see people outside, or how they act in ways that might not be themselves.
Sometimes men are fine mentally, they don't put on a mask and they come out the way they are, and I see that a lot within where I live. Like, you know, I see a lot of, perhaps maybe not in this area that we live in, but maybe other places in the United Kingdom, men can come out and they can be freely who they are. For example, a gay man can walk about safely and can positively say he's gay, but perhaps in an area like Tower Hamlets, he can't do that. And it really just depends on the certain demographics, where you live especially. For example, a man can't be gay in, let's say, I believe it's like Zambia, Zimbabwe, one of those countries that are heavily a Christian country. But it's not just about you know, your sexuality as well, because when you mask out, you also seem, you know, mentally, emotionally, you can be that too. And again, it just depends on, you know, in the way we take that mask off it's a very generic thing to say, but breaking down the stigma. But then how do you break down the stigma? Do you break that stigma externally outside of the male community, or internally within the male community? One thing I really am passionate about is education, and I genuinely feel like
we can learn about sex ed in education, right? But we don't learn about mental health in education. From a young age, why aren't we teaching year 7 to year 8? So even children in primary how to regulate their mental health.
Yeah.
How to, when to seek help, the right phone numbers to call, the right hotline numbers to call.
Yeah.
If we can teach a child to, or even teach a child to put a condom on a plastic penis, surely we can teach a kid how to look after their mental health and well-being. And I generally feel to like teach kids about mental health as a whole, both females and males. And that way we can break the stigma down, because I generally believe starting to break that stigma is all rooted in education. Because yeah, like genuinely that's something I really believe in.
What do you think toxic masculinity is?
What do I think? What is it?
Toxic masculinity.
What's toxic? I think it's the false belief. A child believes how they're supposed to act or think to grow up into a certain type of male. And I think not realizing the damages their actions and their thoughts could have on someone else. I think that would be my definition.
And how do you think it can affect the person or other people?
How we can
Affect the person or other people?
How it affects the person? I think how it affects the person is if that person fully believes in a certain mindset, and they believe that mindset makes them a very good man when they grow up. It will be hard to change that person's thought into an alternative way of thinking. And I think that person will miss out on learning opportunities to develop into a better person because they're so fixed on one set of one mindset that they believe will get them somewhere. And how it affects others, it can affect others by offending, it can affect others by by offending, by desensitizing yourself to what other people feel. But then again, there is that argument that there are some successful people in it as well that developed or achieved their fortune or their level of success by being toxic. So there is a debate, in my opinion.
And let's say they wore a type of mask that didn't let them act the way that they did. How could they take that mask off and act the way that they want? Without getting...
First they have to realise that they want to. I guess how they can is just by being open. Studying, and I think it's down to sort of really understanding that everyone's different. Everyone was brought up in different places, different parenting styles, or they were brought up by different parent styles from different parts of the world, different beliefs, different values, and different ambitions. So if they realise that maybe people might be different and there is no set way of growing up, then maybe that could, I would say, loosen the cognition to be more fluid in trying to learn from experiences and adapting things that work for them, rather than just believing that this is what makes you a male, so to get to that place you have to act a certain way.
What do you think toxic masculinity means?
It just means when masculinity is the idea of being male, isn't it? So toxic masculinity is when those masculine babes could come out of it, hurting those and others around them, such as being too macho and not knowing when to really open up or that sort of thing.
How can it affect people?
How can it affect people? It can affect the person themselves. If they feel like they've got to keep up a tough persona, then they wouldn't really turn to anyone. I know a lot of men on social media who, if I were to ask, who would you turn to when you're at your lowest? They'd probably say nobody. That no one would, really care. When in reality, I bet a lot of people would.
How could they take off the type of mask that they wear?
Well, there are multiple ways out there. There are therapists, there are always people to talk to everywhere. Sometimes are close, sometimes are close friend is all that what really people need. A confidant, someone to really open up to, someone that they know that they can trust.
I hope you enjoyed it and that you enjoyed the people's point of views. So, one thing I've heard a lot out of people is like the backgrounds or like the name calling that they get or how they act and why they do this. For example, the religion belief that they get is like how they grew up in and that they might act and they have to act like that, or the name calling like don't be a crybaby, man up, have some balls, don't be a pussy, etc, etc. They don't want you and they think that you have to act like that, but also the person in the inside might not want to act like that. And for example, what also shocked me a bit is how people said how the other people might be feeling, not the only person protected. Because also during it, the person's detective might be thinking what they're doing is right because of the way that they grew up. But then let's say for example a female or just any person has been talking to that person and they've been saying like, oh, for example, they're like, oh yeah, don't be such a crybaby, oh you're being such a man, and don't be, grow up, have all this stuff, and they'll just be name calling them. But then in reality, the male might just be like, for example, but then the male might respond to her in the society's point of view, and then he might be thinking, oh I don't really want to do this, but I have to fit in. And then the female might start getting all sensitive in ways that she doesn't want to, but she thought it was right because everyone else has been saying it and that they shouldn't be acting like that. But then also, also in the end, the male or the person that has been doing all this stuff, they might be going through some things as well, and they might not be okay, and they might just need help. So what I hope that you gather from this video is go around and ask people if they're okay, and bring up the subject so they feel welcome to talk about it. And I hope this changed your point of view and perspective, because I even found out stuff that I didn't think I'll be finding out about, and it changed my point of view sometimes, because I didn't think I'll be hearing about people saying, oh, how they think about the other person, because when I asked the question, I was just thinking that they will just say the person's perspective, and like in the end no one's perfect and you all need help, even if it's the female or the person making the statements and the male or the person talking back to it. Everyone needs help, and just bring up the subject and make everyone feel welcome. I hope you enjoyed it and hope this changed your perspective. Thank you.